My wife! My wife! Is it truly you? In the middle of the muddy...
Beside an overturned wooden cart, a woman sat slumped in the dirt. Her coarse wool dress was torn at the edges. Her rough hands were trembling. And upon her back, 2 heavy swaddling blankets were tied tightly together. They were twins. The woman slowly lifted her head. The face of the wife he had mourned, the wife whose eulogy he had wept over, upon receiving notice of her death 3 years ago, was right there, alive, carrying 2 children on her back. What in the world had happened? Over the past 3 years? And whose children were those 2 little ones? Welcome to our tales of medieval England, a land of ancient castles. Now, let our deeply moving tale of yesteryear begin. In the candlelit chapel of the manor estate, where Alden, the lord of the local shire, resided, the thick scent of frankincense rose in the cold air day after day. In the early hours of the morning, long before the rooster crowed to greet the dawn, Alden rose from his bed. After a quick wash of his face in a freezing basin, he carefully pushed open the heavy oak doors of the chapel. The morning chill seeped through the cracks. Alden lit 3 beeswax candles, knelt upon the cold stone floor, and bowed his head before the stone memorial plaque. 5 words were neatly carved into the weathered stone. In loving memory of Clare. It was a memorial dedicated to the soul of the woman he had called his wife. In his 32 years of life, it was the name Alden loved most dearly, and the name that brought him the most agonizing pain. From the day he received the tragic news of Clare's passing 3 years ago, Alden had knelt in this exact spot every single morning. At first, he wept. No matter how hard he tried to hold it back, the tears would not stop. There were days when he wailed aloud before the cold stone until he collapsed from sheer exhaustion. But as time passed, even tears were bound to dry. He no longer cried. He merely stared blankly at the memorial. The smoke from the candles drifted thinly toward the vaulted ceiling of the chapel. Following the smoke with his hollow eyes, Alden quietly parted his lips. "My wife, I have come again today." No one answered. The chapel remained utterly silent. Only the dawn wind, squeezing through the cracks in the heavy door, made the candle flames dance. Alden closed his eyes. Clare's face appeared in his mind. It was her smiling face from the very first day they met. Alden knelt there like that for a long time. Beyond the chapel doors, he could feel the first light of dawn breaking. The birds began to sing. A new day was beginning. Alden slowly pushed himself up from the stone floor. This was his every morning. Leaving the chapel, Alden made his way to the manor hall. It was his 2nd year serving as the lord and magistrate of this rural shire. Settling the disputes of the commoners, reviewing the tax parchments, and patrolling the manor fields filled his days to the brim. He performed his duties flawlessly. He never once allowed himself to be lazy. Yet none of it made him feel truly alive. When he ate his barley bread and thin soup, he could taste nothing but ash. When he slept, he woke feeling no rest. The manor guards and clerks whispered behind his back. "Not a single soul has seen our Lord smile," they would say. He works with the precision of a ghost, but he is more like a wooden puppet than a man. They were not wrong. Alden knew it himself. Ever since Clare left this world, he had been living as a man half dead. On the first and midday of every month, he visited Clare's grave. It was a lonely stone marker resting on a low hill, just outside the village. Her name was etched into the weathered stone. Alden would kneel before the grave and sit for a long time. He even spoke to her. "I fear a winter famine will strike the village this year," he would say. "If you were beside me, you would have offered words of comfort." No answer ever returned, but Alden did not stop. It was the only way he could feel he was still breathing. Only when he stood by that grave, feeling the wind brush past his face, did he feel as though Clare had not truly left him. At the edge of the village lived a wise parish scholar named Silas. Though well past his 70th winter, his back was straight as a sword, and his eyes were piercingly clear. It was said he was once a high-ranking official in the royal court before retiring to this quiet countryside. Shortly after Alden took his post, Silas had visited the manor hall. He claimed he had come to pay his respects to the new lord as an elder of the parish. Since that day, the two crossed paths from time to time. Silas knew of Alden's tragic circumstances. Such gossip could never be contained in a medieval village. Everyone knew the young lord had lost his wife and had lived entirely alone for 3 years. It was a late autumn afternoon. Alden was walking back from the burial hill when he encountered Silas on the muddy castle road. The old scholar stared deep into Alden's face for a long moment before speaking. In a low, steady voice, "My lord, I have a word for you." Alden stopped in his tracks. "The bonds of the heart," Silas said, "are forged long before the bonds of blood." It was a sudden, cryptic remark. Alden could not immediately grasp its meaning. Silas offered no further explanation. He merely smiled quietly, leaned on his wooden walking stick, and continued on his way. Alden pondered those words for a long time. What it meant for the bonds of the heart to precede blood, he did not know then. Yet, strangely, those words embedded themselves deep within his soul for a very long time. It was the spring of his 29th year when Alden first met Clare. It happened in the bustling, muddy market square of the capital city. That day, Alden had just received his appointment from the Crown Authority, and, for the first time in a long while, took a moment to walk through the market alone. Having been surrounded by strict formalities and the rigid rules of knighthood, this was a rare taste of freedom. On one side of the market square, a small wooden stall was set up. It was a modest stall, selling sweet honey cakes. Behind the stall sat a young woman. Her clothes were far from grand. Just a simple linen gown and a plain coif, but her eyes were exceptionally clear and bright. When commoners haggled aggressively, she did not flinch, and when they were rude, she never lost her gentle smile. Without realizing it, Alden found his feet stopping before her. He bought a bundle of honey cakes. As he handed her a few silver pennies, he asked for her name. The woman briefly raised her eyes to look at Alden. "I am Clare," she said, "of a fallen noble house." Her voice was low and calm. Alden's heart began to beat in a strange, frantic rhythm. All the way back to his grand estate, her voice echoed in his mind. The next day, and the day after that, Alden returned to the market square. His steps always seemed to halt right in front of Clare's stall. After about a month had passed, Alden finally gathered his courage and spoke. To run into each other every single day must be the work of fate, he said. Would you share a cup of warm mead with me, milady? Clare hesitated for a moment. Then she gave a small nod. And so, the fateful bond between the two began. Clare's family was of noble blood, but they had fallen into ruin. Having lost her father early on, and with her mother taken by winter sickness, Clare was left entirely alone to make a meager living. Alden's family, on the other hand, was a highly esteemed and wealthy house in the capital. They were a lineage that had served the royal court for generations. Alden's mother, Maud, the stern mistress of the house, immediately scowled the moment she heard her son was courting a common market girl. It was the day Alden brought Clare to the grand estate to introduce her to his mother. Clare dressed as neatly as she could and bowed respectfully. But Maud's eyes were freezing cold from the very start. Throughout the entire meal, she did not spare Clare a single glance. When Alden briefly left the great hall, Maud muttered in a low, venomous tone, "To think a stall-keeper's daughter dares to cross the threshold of my noble house!" Clare kept her head bowed, unable to speak a single word. On the carriage ride back that evening, Clare carefully broke the silence. "My lord," she said, "I fear the mistress of the house finds me entirely unworthy." Alden gripped Clare's hand tightly. "Give it time, and she will understand. I will not let you go." But Alden was anxious too. His mother's icy glare kept flashing in his mind. A few days later, a messenger arrived from Maud. When Alden reached the grand estate, his mother was sitting alone in the heavy oak chair of the great hall. "Sit." Her voice was like ice. "That girl? I had her lineage checked. She has no standing, no wealth, no backing whatsoever. She is not fit for our house. Cut your ties with her at once." Alden spoke up. "Mother, I intend to marry Clare." Maud's eyes hardened into stone. "If you do, I will strike your name from our family's lineage." A heavy silence fell over the hall. Alden raised his head and looked his mother dead in the eye. "Do as you must." Maud could not hide her shock. The son she had raised with her own hands did not even blink at the threat of being disowned. After staring at Alden for a long time, Maud let out a long, weary sigh. "Fine. It seems I cannot break your stubborn will. However, the wedding will be a quiet affair in the village church, with only family present. And once she enters this estate, she must obey the strict laws of this house without fail." Alden nodded. He did not care about any conditions. As long as he could be with Clare, nothing else mattered. On the day of the church wedding, Clare wore a beautiful blue wool dress with a pale pink bodice. In her hair rested a silver clasp Alden had specially crafted for her. It was a half-moon silver clasp. The other half was kept safely tucked inside Alden's tunic. "Only when the two pieces are joined do they become whole," he had told her. Alden thought Clare was the most beautiful woman in the entire kingdom that day. After the vows were spoken, Alden held Clare's hands and whispered, "I will make you happy, my wife." Clare smiled brightly. But behind that smile hid an undeniable shadow of fear. Clare already knew the truth. She knew her mother-in-law had not truly accepted her. After the wedding, Clare began her harsh new life under the roof of Alden's ancestral home. Waking before the morning bells chimed was the first rule of the house. She had to prepare the exact morning feast the stern mistress demanded. In the freezing, pitch-black hours of dawn, Clare would light the hearth fire and begin her day. She prepared every dish with the utmost care. But Maud was never satisfied. "There is no salt in this. The soup is cold." She would spit out a single sharp critique and drop her silver spoon onto the wooden table. Clare would simply bow her head and retreat back to the smoky kitchen. The hours of the day when Alden was away at the royal court were the hardest. Maud would summon Clare and force her to do the most grueling labor of the estate, sweeping the massive stone courtyard, drawing heavy buckets of water from the deep well, scrubbing the laundry until her knuckles bled, and polishing the wooden floors of the mistress's chambers. From sunrise until the sun dipped below the horizon, she had not a moment to rest. Her hands grew rough and calloused, and her face grew pale and thin. One afternoon, Alden returned to the estate earlier than usual. Even from beyond the heavy iron gates, he could hear Maud raising her voice at Clare. "Of all the things you do, is there not a single task you can complete properly?" He could also hear the quiet, stifled sounds of Clare weeping. Alden threw open the heavy wooden door and stepped inside. "Mother, what is the meaning of this?" Maud did not look the least bit surprised. "You are home early, my son. I am simply teaching your wife her place." Alden walked over and stood firmly by Clare's side. "Clare is my wife. Even you, Mother, have no right to treat her this way." Maud's face turned to stone. That night, in the quiet of their chambers, Alden held Clare's rough, bruised hands and spoke softly. "I am so sorry. I am sorry I could not protect you." Clare gently shook her head. "It is all right. As long as I have you, my lord, I need nothing else." Alden pulled Clare tightly into his arms. Deep in his heart, he swore an oath to the heavens. No matter what happened, he would protect this woman with his life. It was autumn, the 6th month since their church wedding. An urgent missive arrived for Alden from the royal court. It was a decree from the king himself. He was ordered to act as a royal inspector, touring the shires and lordships of the northern and western marches. When Clare heard the news, the color briefly drained from her face. Alden noticed this. He was about to ask what troubled her, but Clare smiled first and spoke. "It is a royal decree, so you must certainly go. Keep yourself safe on the road, my lord." Alden's heart was heavy. Leaving Clare behind weighed on him, especially leaving her alone with his mother. On the night before his departure, Alden sat facing Clare by the hearth fire. "If any hardship befalls you while I am away, speak to Will, the manor steward. He is a man you can trust." Clare nodded. She hesitated for a moment before speaking. "My lord, there is something I must tell you." But at that exact moment, Robin, his attendant, knocked urgently on the heavy chamber door. "My lord, I have a question regarding the preparations for tomorrow's journey." Alden told him to wait a moment. He looked back at Clare. "What is it, my wife?" Clare gazed at Alden's face for a long while before slowly shaking her head. "It is nothing. I will tell you upon your return." Her voice was calm, yet deep within her eyes, something was quietly trembling. Alden did not notice it. Early the next morning, Alden hurriedly packed his saddlebags. Clare came out to the manor gates to see him off. Alden held Clare's hands tightly. "I shall return in a month's time. Take good care of yourself, my wife." Clare nodded. "Travel safely, my lord." Alden rode out through the gates. Clare watched his departing figure for a long time. One hand slowly drifted down to her lower stomach. Her fingertips gently cradled her womb. That was the very thing Clare had wanted to tell Alden, but she could not bring herself to say it. She wanted to deliver it as joyous news upon his safe return. Alden's figure disappeared at the bend of the castle road. Only then did Clare close her eyes. 10 days passed since Alden's departure. Strange sensations visited Clare's body day by day. Every morning, her stomach churned. The smell of roasted meat and winter pickles made her nauseous. Maud watched Clare with cold eyes and spoke sharply. "What good is a daughter-in-law who cannot even stomach her bread and soup?" Clare endured the harsh words. Days passed, but her condition did not improve. She went alone to the old monastery to seek out Gareth, the local monk healer. Gareth felt her pulse and spoke carefully. "Congratulations, milady. You are with child." Clare's hands trembled. "Is it truly so?" "It is. But there is one thing more." Gareth hesitated for a moment before continuing. "It feels to be twins." Clare felt tears welling up in her eyes. She could hardly believe it. All the way back to the manor, Clare kept both hands wrapped protectively around her stomach. "How overjoyed my lord will be when he finds out. I only need to wait a month. When my lord returns, I shall tell him then." But as soon as she arrived at the estate, Maud was standing in the stone courtyard. "Where have you been?" Clare's heart sank. "I merely went out for some fresh air, mother." "Do not lie to me. I know full well you went to the monk healer." Maud's glare was as sharp as a dagger. Clare bowed her head. Maud slowly approached her. Her voice was low and icy. "Are you carrying a child?" Instead of answering, Clare cradled her stomach with both hands. That simple gesture revealed everything. Maud's face turned to stone. It was not joy. It was pure wrath. Maud ordered Clare into the great hall. As soon as the heavy oak doors shut, her voice turned venomous. "Do not even think of giving birth to those children." Clare could not believe her ears. "Mother, what are you saying?" "You heard exactly what I said. The spawn of a penniless, ruined woman like you can never be acknowledged as the noble blood of our house." Maud's eyes were cold and resolute. Clare instinctively wrapped her arms around her womb. "These children are my lord's heirs. I will never give them up." "Then leave this house, this very day." Clare's legs trembled, but she did not fall to her knees. She raised her head and looked straight at Maud. "Please, I beg of you, just wait until my lord returns. Once my lord knows, everything will change." Maud scoffed bitterly. "I know my own son. He is not a man who would forsake his noble house for the likes of you." That night, Clare tried to send a sealed parchment to Alden, but the manor servants were all terrified of Maud. No one would grant Clare's desperate plea. "If the mistress of the house finds out, we will be thrown out to starve. Forgive us, milady." Clare sat alone in her cold stone chamber. The howling wind battered the window shutters. Her hands, clutching her stomach, trembled violently. But Clare gritted her teeth. She had to endure until her lord returned. It was the morning of the 20th day since Alden had ridden away. Maud threw open the door to Clare's chamber. Behind her stood two unfamiliar, burly manor guards. "Pack your belongings, right now." Clare stood up from her chair. "Mother, you cannot do this." "I have already spoken. I will not say it twice." Maud gave a sharp nod to the men. The guards barged into the room and began shoving her linen gowns and woolen cloaks carelessly into a rough sack. "Do not touch my things." Clare tried to block them, but with her pregnant body, she had no strength to fight them off. Clare fell to her knees. "I beg of you, please, just give me 10 days until my lord returns. Have mercy for the sake of these children." Maud did not flinch. "It is exactly because of those children that you must go." The guards grabbed Clare by the arms. Clare struggled frantically, but in the end, she was dragged out and shoved beyond the manor gates. A single cloth sack was tossed into the mud before her, and the heavy iron-wrought gates slammed shut. Clare collapsed in the dirt before the locked gates. She pounded on the thick wood with both hands. "Mother, please open the gate. I beg you." But the gates did not open. Not a single sound came from within the estate. The sun was beginning to set. Clare sat there for a long time. Tears would not even fall. She was paralyzed by fear. She had nowhere to go. She had no noble family to return to, no kin to offer her shelter. Slowly, Clare picked up her sack and stood. She walked, placing one foot in front of the other. She was starving. Her body felt heavier than lead. But she could not stop. She had to survive, for the sake of the 2 lives growing inside her. Beneath the eaves of the gatehouse, a white falcon watched Clare's retreating figure. It was a falcon with an old scar beneath its left wing. It was the same bird Clare had found injured in the spring and had nursed back to health with her own hands. The bird remained on its perch until Clare disappeared at the end of the muddy lane. A long while later, it took flight, soaring low and turning in the direction Clare had gone. It would be a long time before Alden learned the truth of all this. On the day he received the false tidings of her death and wept while lighting a candle in the cold stone chapel, Clare was already in a strange, distant land, giving birth to their 2 children all alone. The pale sunlight beat down upon the muddy castle road. Alden slowly raised himself up from his saddle. His legs refused to move properly. The wife he had been told was dead 3 years ago was standing right before his eyes, alive, carrying 2 young children on her back. Robin hastily rushed forward and grabbed Alden's arm. "My lord, are you unwell?" Alden could not answer. Step by step, he walked toward Clare. Clare stood frozen in place. Her body was half turned, as if she had tried to flee, but her feet seemed rooted to the earth. As Alden drew near, tears spilled from Clare's eyes. "My lord!" It was her voice, the very voice he had heard in his dreams. Alden took hold of Clare's shoulders with both hands. Her shoulders were so frail. She was far thinner than she had been 3 years ago. Tears streamed down Alden's face. He was a man who had ridden across the length and breadth of the kingdom, never once showing a tear before another soul. But in that moment, he could not hold them back.
"My wife, is it truly you? Are you really alive?"
It seemed she could not find her voice. Her lips merely trembled. From behind her back, one of the children let out a soft whimper. Only then did Alden come to his senses and look at his surroundings. They were standing in the middle of the king's highway. Passing peasants and merchants had stopped their wooden carts to stare. Alden gave Robin a sharp look. "Lead us to the nearest roadside inn." "Hurry." They found refuge at a roadside inn. Alden paid silver coins to rent an entire private room. Clare lowered the children from her back and laid them upon a straw mattress. Both children were utterly exhausted. Their small cheeks were stained with dirt, and their clothes were nothing but ragged wool. Alden quietly gazed down at the children. One was a boy, the other a girl. Both children had eyes that looked terribly familiar. The slope of their noses, the shape of their brows. There was something undeniably recognizable about them. Alden's heart plummeted in his chest. The innkeeper brought in a wooden tray of hot food. Clare fed the children first. She mashed the barley bread into the thin soup with a wooden spoon and fed it to them, bite by bite. The children ate ravenously. They were so starved they did not even notice the broth dripping down their chins as they opened their mouths for more. Watching this, Alden felt as though his heart was being torn to shreds. Only after the children had filled their bellies did Clare finally pick up a spoon for herself. Her hands were shaking. Even lifting a spoonful of soup seemed to drain her strength. Alden asked quietly, "My wife, what in God's name happened?" Clare set her spoon down. She looked at the children for a moment. Then she slowly spoke. "My lord, may I ask you a question first?" "Speak." "Did you hear that I had died?" Alden's eyes wavered. "I did. My mother told me so herself. She said you were taken by a sudden illness." But Clare slowly nodded. She looked as though she had expected this. Tears rolled down her cheeks. "I see." At those 2 simple words, Alden felt his chest split open. For 3 years, Clare had lived knowing that Alden believed she was dead in the ground. Having eaten their fill, the children drifted off to sleep. Clare tucked a woolen blanket over them. Their tiny hands were clasped together. The twins looked identical, even in their slumber. Alden stared at the sleeping children for a long time.
Are these children my heirs?
Clare nodded.
They are.
They are your children, my lord. Alden closed his eyes. From deep within his soul, he heard the sound of something crumbling. To think he had such children in this world. To think they had lived in such wretched hardship for 3 years. And to think he had known absolutely nothing. Do they have names? I have been calling them Finn and Fay. I wished to give them their proper names, together with you, once my lord returned. Alden gently stroked the soft cheeks of his sleeping children. The flesh of the children was so soft. How had such tiny, fragile things survived the bitter winter nights? How deeply had they starved? But Alden clenched his jaw. Tears spilled down his cheeks, but he made no move to wipe them away.
My lady, he whispered, the rest of this tale can wait until the morrow.
Rest your weary head tonight. But Clare shook her head.
No, my lord, there are things you must know. And so,
in the quiet dimness of the roadside inn, Clare began to speak with a steady, haunting calm. She told him of the days after he had ridden away on the king's business, how Maud had discovered her pregnancy, how the stern mistress of the house had demanded she rid herself of the child, how the manor guards had dragged her by her arms and cast her out the heavy oak doors of the estate. She did not weep as she spoke. It was as if all her tears had dried up 3 long winters ago. Listening to her, Alden held his hands in fists so tight his knuckles turned bone white. "How did you survive after that?" he asked, his voice trembling. Clare hesitated for a moment. "I simply lived, because I had to." That was all she said. But that single, quiet phrase carried the heavy weight of 3 agonizing years. Morning broke. Alden rose from his bed long before the first light crept over the horizon. He had not slept a wink. Clare's words had echoed in his mind through the dark hours. He summoned Robin, his trusted attendant. "Ride ahead to the main manor," Alden commanded in a hushed tone. "Find Will, the manor steward. Tell him I return soon, but say nothing to any living soul of where I am or what I have found." Robin nodded faithfully and hurried to his horse. Alden stood in the muddy courtyard of the inn, gazing up at the pale morning sky. The spring air was crisp. From somewhere far off, the haunting cry of a great white falcon echoed through the mist. Alden listened to it, his mind lost in a heavy daze. After breaking their fast with some warm barley porridge, Clare brought the children out into the courtyard. Having rested through the night, they seemed to have gathered a little strength. Finn toddled across the packed earth. Fay stood shyly, her small hands clutching the rough wool of her mother's dress. Alden walked over and knelt in the dirt before Finn. The young boy looked up at him, blinking his large eyes with the caution of a wild creature facing a stranger. Slowly, Alden extended his hand. Finn hesitated, then reached out with his tiny fingers and grasped one of Alden's. The sudden, living warmth of that small hand stole the breath from Alden's lungs. 4 days passed. Alden left Clare and the children safely at the inn and rode hard toward the ancestral manor estate. When he arrived at the grand stone gates,
Will, the steward, was already standing outside. Will was an old, weathered man who had served the Lord's household for over 40 years, a loyal servant who had watched over Alden since he was a boy in the nursery. "Welcome home, young master." Will's eyes betrayed him. There was no joy in his gaze, only a deep, trembling fear. Alden did not miss the shadow that crossed the old man's face. "Will, walk with me." The two men moved to the quiet shadows of the outer bailey. Alden pulled the heavy wooden door shut behind them and turned. What truly happened 3 years ago? Will's face turned ashen. "I know not what you mean, my lord. I speak of my wife." "I speak of Clare." Will's eyes darted to the cobblestones. His hands began to shake. Alden stood in absolute silence, waiting. A long, suffocating moment passed before the old steward slowly sank to his knees on the cold stone. "Forgive me, my lord. I should have spoken. I should have told you." "Tell me now," Alden commanded. Will's voice shook with grief. "It was the mistress of the house. Maud cast her out. It was barely 20 days after you had ridden off with the royal writ. She summoned 2 of the guards and forced them to pack the young lady's meager belongings. Milady fell to her knees upon the floorboards, begging for mercy. But your mother would not hear a word of it, even knowing she was with child." Will choked on a sob, tears streaming down his wrinkled face. She wept at the iron gates, pounding her fists against the wood. None of us could go to her. Maud swore that any servant who breathed a word of this to you would be stripped of their livelihood and banished from the estate forever. Alden stood frozen, the breath trapped in his chest. His hands slowly balled into fists at his sides. "Then the notice of her death," Alden whispered, "was a forgery crafted by my mother." "It was, my lord, sent by messenger 10 days before your return." Alden closed his eyes. Every piece of the cruel puzzle fell into place. He could hear the sound of everything he had believed for the past 3 years, shattering into dust. "Why did you not tell me?" Alden asked, his voice hollow. Will bowed his head to the stone. "I have no excuse, my lord. When you went away to your new post, I had no way to send word. And when you finally returned, you were a man half dead with grief. I was a coward. I could not bear to break you further." Alden asked no more. The sin did not belong to Will. He opened the heavy door and stepped back out into the courtyard. The sky above the castle road was blindingly clear. Looking up at the heavens, Alden ground his teeth together. He knew the truth now, and he knew exactly what he had to do next. The sun had not yet set when Alden rode back into the courtyard of the roadside inn. Clare was sitting on a wooden bench, watching the children. Finn was crouching in the dirt, dragging a small twig to draw something in the mud. Faye was beside him, happily patting the earth with her hands. Clare looked back and forth between her twins, a quiet, beautiful smile gracing her lips. Seeing her, Alden stopped in his tracks. It was the smile he had lost for 3 long years. As Alden stepped closer, Finn looked up. Unlike the days before, the boy did not run away. He simply held his twig and stared at the tall lord. Alden knelt beside him. What are you drawing, little one? Finn pointed to the ground. A series of crooked, wobbly lines had been carved into the mud. Alden studied the shapes. You have drawn a bird. Finn nodded. Where did you see such a bird? Finn pointed a dirty finger toward the sky. Alden looked up. Far above the thatched roofs, a magnificent white falcon was gliding through the evening clouds. Clare was watching the bird as well, but her eyes held a strange depth. It was not the look of a woman merely watching a passing creature of the sky. That evening, beside the warmth of the hearth fire, Alden told Clare everything Will had confessed. She kept her head bowed as she listened. Did you know, my lady? Alden asked. Did you know my mother would craft a false tale of your death? Clare raised her eyes. I did not know for certain, but I guessed as much. She knew that when you returned, you would search the ends of the earth for me. She was terrified of that. Alden could barely speak around the lump in his throat. Do you not hate me? Clare fell silent for a long moment. At first, I cursed your name, she admitted softly. Then she looked toward the bed where the twins lay sleeping. But now, I have them. These children kept me breathing. Alden reached out and took both of Clare's hands in his. They were rough, calloused, and scarred. These were the hands that had battled the freezing winter, the hands that had chopped wood and scrubbed floors just to keep 2 infants fed and clothed. Forgive me, my lady, Alden whispered, his voice breaking. I failed to protect you. Clare shook her head. It was not your fault, my lord. No. It was, Alden replied, his voice dropping to a heavy murmur. I should have been stronger. I should have stood as a shield between you and my mother. For a long time, neither spoke. The candlelight flickered against the stone walls. The only sound was the gentle, rhythmic breathing of the sleeping children. As the days passed at the inn, color began to return to Clare and the children's cheeks. Finn was learning to speak more words, and though Faye was quiet, her eyes were bright and alert. Alden spent every waking hour sitting beside them. The children, who had hidden behind their mother's skirts at first, began to reach out to him by the 3rd day. One afternoon, Finn bravely crawled right into Alden's lap. Alden froze in surprise. Clare quickly stepped forward to pull the boy away. No, Finn, you must not, she scolded gently. But Alden raised a hand to stop her. Let him be. Finn buried his small face against Alden's chest. Alden wrapped his arms around the boy with a trembling gentleness. It was the first time in his life he had ever held a child. He could not fathom how something so light could feel so incredibly warm. Not wanting to be left behind, Faye waddled over and sat right against Alden's knee. Alden gathered Finn in one arm and scooped Faye up with the other. Watching her husband hold their children, Clare's eyes filled with tears that spilled silently down her cheeks. On their 5th day at the inn, Alden asked Clare the question that had been burning in his heart. My lady, where did you go? How did you live these past 3 years? Please, tell me everything. Clare closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and began from the very beginning. She told him of the day she was banished, wandering the muddy market square with nowhere to turn. When the bitter autumn winds began to howl, she sought refuge in an abandoned, half-ruined thatched cottage on the edge of the forest. Winter arrived with a vengeance. The icy drafts whipped through the gaps in the walls. There were days she collapsed in the snow while trying to gather kindling from the woods. But she forced herself to stand. She had to live for the lives growing inside her. When spring finally broke the frost, Clare gave birth to the twins alone in that wretched hut. A poor peasant woman from a neighboring farm had heard her cries and come to help. If not for her, Clare whispered, I do not know if we would have seen the morning. After the children were born, she worked from dawn until dusk. She gathered bundles of firewood to sell in the village square and scrubbed clothes for a few copper pennies. That was how she fed and kept her babies warm. Listening to her tale, Alden could not utter a single word. It felt as though an iron band was tightening around his chest, crushing his heart. When she finished, Clare added softly, I do not resent you, my lord. I always believed that one day you would come looking for us. Alden squeezed her hands tightly. I have found you. I have finally found you. That very evening, a magnificent white falcon landed in the muddy courtyard of the inn. The innkeeper rushed out with a broom to chase it away, but the great bird refused to move. It stood its ground in the center of the yard, its wings half spread. Clare stepped out of the tavern door. Seeing the bird, she stopped. Then slowly walked toward it. It is you, she murmured softly. The falcon tilted its head. Clare reached out her hand, and the grand bird gently nudged her knuckles with its beak. Alden watched the scene from the shadows of the doorway. Clare turned to him. 3 years ago, I found this creature with a broken wing. I bound it and cared for it until it could fly again. Ever since, it appears whenever the darkness closes in. It came the night the children were born, and the night the roof of our hut caved in beneath the snow. Alden looked closely at the falcon. The beast stared back at him with piercing eyes. Just beneath its left wing, a faint, jagged scar was visible through the white feathers. A moment later, the falcon spread its massive wings, caught the evening draft, and took to the sky. Its pale form vanished into the gathering dusk. Clare watched it go, her eyes filled with quiet reverence. Alden could not sleep that night. The image of Clare's 3 years of suffering burned in his mind. He also knew that on the morrow he must ride back to the ancestral manor and face Maud. How he would confront her, how he would drag the truth into the light, was still hidden in a fog of uncertainty. But one thing was absolute. He would never, for as long as he drew breath, leave Clare and his children again. When morning came, Alden stood before his wife. My lady, I must return to the estate and bring this truth to light. I must face my mother. Clare looked up at him, her eyes filled with worry. My lord, Maud will not be easily swayed. The elders of the noble house will all stand by her side, and you know this. I know, Alden replied. Then why? Clare began, her voice trembling for the wrongs she had suffered. Because of those 3 years. Alden's voice was firm. Clare looked into his eyes for a moment. It was the exact same gaze that had looked upon her on their wedding day 3 years ago. A gaze that swore to protect her no matter the cost. "Be careful, my lord," she whispered. Alden nodded. Before taking his leave, he knelt beside the children. Little Finn grabbed the edge of Alden's heavy wool cloak.
"Where are you going?" Alden gently stroked Finn's hair.
"I will return soon. Wait for me." Finn nodded his head. Alden stood up. His eyes met Clare's once more. No words were needed. Alden walked out the wooden gate. The journey back to the ancestral manor in the city was not long. Yet Alden knew full well what awaited him at the end of that road. It was mid-afternoon, with the winter sun hanging pale in the sky, when he finally arrived at the grand stone gates of the estate. Alden stood before the entrance for a long moment. 3 years ago, Clare must have knelt upon these very cobblestones, weeping and pleading in the freezing cold. Alden did not push that agonizing thought from his mind. Instead, he carved it deeper into his heart. He pushed the heavy oak doors open and stepped inside. Maud, the mistress of the house, was seated in the great hall. She must have heard the servants announce her son's return, for she was already sitting perfectly upright in her high-backed wooden chair. Her eyes were placid. Her face bore the expression of a woman who believed in absolutely nothing was amiss. Alden looked straight into that face. "Have you returned, my son? Did the king's commission go well?" Maud's voice was as calm and composed as ever. Alden stood tall before his mother. "Mother, I have something to tell you." "Sit by the hearth and speak," she offered. "I will speak standing," he replied. Maud's brow twitched ever so slightly. She clearly sensed that her son's tone was entirely different from his usual demeanor. "I have found Clare." For a fleeting moment, a dead silence fell over the great hall. The hand holding Maud's silver goblet paused in midair. "She is alive, along with our 2 children." Maud did not answer. Alden took a step closer. "I have heard everything from Will. I know that you cast my pregnant wife out into the snow, and that you forged the letter of mourning to tell me she was dead." Maud slowly lowered her silver goblet to the heavy timber table. Then she raised her eyes to look at Alden. "And so?" 2 words. 2 short, freezing words. Alden searched her eyes for any trace of remorse. There was none. "Why did you do it?" he asked. "For the honor of our noble house," she replied. "For the noble house? You cast a woman out to die? With child? In the dead of winter?" Alden's voice trembled low in his throat. Maud did not so much as blink. "The offspring that pauper woman bore must never be recognized as the bloodline of this estate. That remains unchanged even now." Alden clenched his jaw. A fiery rage surged within him, but he knew this was not the time or place to unleash his fury. Alden steadied his breathing and spoke. "Mother, I am bringing Clare and the children back to this estate." For the first time, Maud's gaze faltered. "What are you saying?" "Exactly what you just heard. Clare is my lawful wife, and those children are my flesh and blood." Maud rose sharply from her chair. I will not permit it. I do not need your permission, Mother. A heavy silence stretched between them. Maud's eyes shifted. Something else began to mix with her cold, calculating stare. Alden could not tell if it was fear or wrath. Maud finally opened her mouth. If you bring that woman here, I will inform the high lords and the elders of our house. The entire noble family will stand against you. Alden paused at those words. If the elders intervened, it could threaten his lordship and his standing with the crown authority. Yet Alden simply nodded. Do as you must. With that, he turned and walked out of the great hall. He could hear Maud muttering low and dark threats behind his back. But Alden did not stop his stride. It was the following day when Alden left the ancestral estate and headed for the sheriff's court. As a lord returning from the king's circuit, he had official duties and reports to file. He had just finished presenting his findings to the royal magistrate in the council chamber and was stepping out into the stone corridor when he heard a voice call out from behind. Lord Alden, a moment. Alden turned to see one of the highest elders of theirs. Noble house, the old baron. He was an uncle to Alden, a man who had usually treated him with great fondness. But his eyes that day were entirely different. Come here, the baron said, leading them to a quiet, secluded corner of the courtyard. The baron spoke in a hushed, grave tone. I have heard everything from your mother. Is it true that you intend to bring back a dead woman? Alden replied evenly. She is not dead. She is alive. It matters not either way. The baron dismissed with a wave of his hand. Do you not realize that if a woman and her beggar brats set foot in our estate, the foundation of our house will be shaken? Your honor, your lordship, and your royal standing will all be in peril. Alden looked the old baron directly in the eye. Uncle, Clare is my wife, and those children are my blood. The laws and honor of our noble house come first, the baron warned. To me, my family comes before the laws of this house, Alden countered. The baron's face hardened into stone. He stared at Alden for a long time before, cease this madness while I am still asking nicely. If you continue down this path, I will have no choice but to act against you. Alden bowed his head slightly in a gesture of respect, but his resolve did not waver. I hear you, uncle, but my will remains unchanged. The baron turned on his heel and walked away. Alden watched his retreating figure. The battle was going to spread much wider than he had anticipated. It was not just his mother he had to fight. The entire noble house was preparing for war. That night, Alden sat alone in his candlelit study. The flame of the tallow candle flickered in the draught. Will, the trusted manor steward, quietly opened the heavy oak door and slipped inside. My lord, your mind must be burdened with many worries. Alden looked up from the parchment he was staring at. Will, I have a favor to ask of you. Speak it, my lord. 3 years ago, on the night my wife was driven from this estate, was there anyone else who witnessed it? Will fell into deep thought. There were 3 stable hands in the courtyard that night, and the maids tending to the inner chambers must have seen it as well. Would they be willing to testify to the truth? Alden asked. Will's face darkened with sorrow and fear. They are terrified of the mistress of the house.
It will not be easy, my lord. Alden nodded slowly.
I know, but I must ask you to try. After Will bowed and took his leave, Alden was left alone once more. He needed absolute proof of the forged mourning writ. To expose the truth before the high lords and elders, mere words would never suffice. But where in God's name would he find such evidence? Alden closed his eyes, sinking deeper into his thoughts. Just then, a strange sound broke the silence of the night. It was the cry of a night bird outside his window. Alden stood and pushed open the wooden shutters. There, bathed in the pale moonlight, a white falcon was perched upon the stone eaves. It stared directly at Alden. For a fleeting moment, their eyes locked. The pale bird tilted its head to one side, then spread its ghostly wings and took flight. It flew straight toward the wing of the manor where his mother's chambers were located. Alden watched the direction the bird had taken for a long time. Slowly, the chaotic fog in his mind began to clear. There had to be something in his mother's chambers. A draft of the forged parchment, or perhaps a ledger showing silver coins paid to keep the servants quiet. Maud was a meticulous woman. She was the sort to keep records of everything she did. That exact trait might now be her greatest weakness. Early the next morning, Maud left the estate. She announced that she was traveling to the old abbey to offer prayers at the chapel. Alden waited patiently. Only after he saw her carriage pass through the manor gates did he make his way to the inner wing. He stood before the heavy door of his mother's chambers. He had never dared to enter this room uninvited before. But things were different now. He turned the iron ring and pushed the door open. The room was immaculately kept. A silver mirror sat perfectly straight on the vanity, a bone comb resting neatly beside it. Quills and ink were arranged with precision on top of an iron-bound oak trunk. Alden slowly scanned the room. He walked over to the heavy trunk and lifted the lid. Velvet and wool gowns were folded crisply inside. Tucked beneath the heavy fabrics, his fingers brushed against a sealed parchment. Alden pulled it out and broke the wax seal. His hands began to tremble. It was the writ of mourning. It was the exact draft of the letter sent to him 3 years ago, claiming his wife had died, and at the bottom, a date was inscribed. Alden checked the date on the parchment. His heart plummeted into his stomach. There was a gap of more than a fortnight between the night Clare had been banished into the snow and the date written on this writ of mourning. His mother had waited a full 2 weeks after casting Clare out before forging the letter of her death. What had his mother been thinking during that fortnight? She had been calculating the exact time of Alden's return from the king's circuit, waiting for the perfect moment to send the false news. It was a terrifyingly cold and calculated plot. Alden folded the parchment and hid it securely inside his tunic. He placed the empty envelope back exactly where he found it and quietly left the chamber. He finally had his proof, but there was no room for joy in his heart. He still did not know if this single piece of parchment would be enough to break the iron will of his mother and the high lords of the house. It was that very afternoon, with the evidence hidden against his chest, that Maud returned to the estate. As soon as she stepped down from her carriage, she summoned Alden. "Come to the great hall," she commanded. Her voice was different. It was not the voice of a woman who had spent her morning praying by candlelight in a quiet abbey. It was the voice of a woman who had made a ruthless decision. Alden strode into the great hall. Seated beside Maud was a man he did not expect to see so soon. It was an elderly nobleman, a man whose face Alden recognized instantly. It was the Duke, the supreme elder of their noble lineage, the highest authority over their entire house. "Sit," the Duke commanded. Alden took a seat across from them. The Duke slowly opened his mouth. "I have heard the tale from your mother. They say you met a woman on the King's Road, a woman you believed to be dead." "Yes, Your Grace," Alden answered steadily. "I have also heard that you intend to bring this woman into our ancestral estate. Is this true?" "It is true." The Duke's thick white eyebrows shot up. "Listen to reason, man."
That woman has already been recorded as deceased in the parish registry.
"Do you think bringing the dead back to life is a simple matter? What would become of the dignity and honor of our noble house? Your Grace, Clare did not die. My mother forged a false writ of mourning." The Duke's face instantly hardened into a mask of stone. Maud immediately interjected. "Son, watch your tongue. Are you accusing your own mother of weaving lies?" "Mother." Alden's voice dropped dangerously low. "I already know everything." A tense, suffocating silence filled the great hall. Maud and the Duke exchanged a sharp, calculating glance. The Duke slowly stood up from his carved wooden chair. "We shall end this conversation for today. But mark my words well, Alden. If you defy the will of this house, you will not be able to keep your lordship or your lands." It was the first strike, a blatant threat, using his standing with the crown as a weapon. 2 days passed. Alden was in the sheriff's court, reviewing taxation records, when a bailiff cautiously entered the chamber. "My lord, I have urgent news to share." "Speak," Alden said. "There are rumors circulating among the higher magistrates. They say the crown has found irregularities in your report from the royal circuit." Alden looked up, his brow furrowing. "What sort of irregularities?" "They claim you bypassed a jurisdiction during your duties, that there are days of travel unaccounted for in your official parchment." Alden realized instantly what it was. It was the 5 days he had spent at the roadside inn after miraculously finding Clare. Someone had dug into his movements and leaked the missing time to the crown authorities. It was undoubtedly the Duke's doing. This was their second strike. Alden gathered his official ledgers and parchments, preparing to ride to the capital's high court to defend his honor in person. But on his way, he altered his path and rode toward the humble cottage where Clare was staying. As he approached, he could hear the sound of his children playing happily in the yard. Clare looked at Alden's face and, sensing something amiss, asked softly if there was trouble. Alden shook his head. He told her not to worry, assuring her that he would handle the matter. Clare reached out and gently grasped the sleeve of his woolen tunic. She pleaded with him, saying that he did not need to lose so much of his life, and standing just for her sake. Alden looked deeply into Clare's eyes. He told her that she was the one who had lost 3 years of her life in the harsh wilderness, while he had lost nothing at all. Upon returning to the manor, after giving his initial explanations to the local magistrates, Alden found Will waiting for him. The trusted manor steward's face was dark with dread. Will bowed his head and delivered terrible news. He explained that Maud, the stern mistress of the house, had summoned every servant who had been present on that fateful night 3 years ago. She had demanded their absolute silence. Will confessed that Maud had threatened to banish anyone who spoke the truth to Alden, turning them out to starve on the castle roads, while promising generous rewards of silver coins to those who kept their lips sealed. Alden closed his eyes in quiet despair. The servants had all chosen to side with the mistress of the house. Will hung his head, his voice trembling as he apologized, admitting that he too was bound by that same fear. This was the 3rd strike against him. The witnesses had all been effectively silenced. Alden reached into his cloak and pulled out the forged parchment bearing the false tidings of his wife's death. This was the only evidence he had left. Yet he could not be certain if this single piece of sealed parchment would be enough to move the rigid elders of his noble house. That night, a grand gathering took place at the main estate. The elder lords of Alden's noble lineage had convened all at once in the great manor hall, a meeting arranged by the highest-ranking elder of the family. Alden was summoned to stand before them. The grand hall was filled with imposing figures of the house elders, seated in their high-backed wooden chairs. Alden stood tall before the hearth. The high elder was the first to speak, his voice echoing off the cold stone walls. He declared that this gathering was meant to secure the future of their noble line. He demanded to know what greater shame could be brought upon their house than Alden attempting to bring back a woman who was already declared dead to the realm. Alden firmly replied that his wife, Clare, was not dead. He stepped forward and pulled the forged parchment from his coat, unfolding it before the flickering firelight. He explained the dates and the deceitful nature of the writing. A low murmur swept through the gathered lords. Maud's face hardened into a mask of cold stone. However, the high elder quickly quelled the unrest in the room with a single piercing glare. He looked down at Alden and asked what a single piece of parchment was supposed to prove. The elder stated that even if Maud had gone too far in her actions, she had done so to protect the purity and standing of their noble house. Such matters, he insisted, were to be dealt with internally, behind the closed doors of the estate, not dragged out into the muddy market. Squares for the commoners to judge. Alden stood his ground, stating that he had no intention of broadcasting the matter to the outside world, but rather he only wished to bring the truth to light. The high elder let out a cold, mocking laugh. He asked if Alden truly believed that some abstract notion of truth was more important than the survival and honor of their aristocratic bloodline. Every elder in the room stared down at Alden. Not a single man in that grand hall stood on his side. This was the 4th strike. Alden was entirely alone. After the noble elders had departed into the night, only Alden and Maud remained in the vast,
empty hall.
Maud looked at her son and told him that he should finally understand his place. She warned him that no matter how hard he struggled, no single man could defeat the collective will of a noble house. Alden gave no reply. Maud commanded him to do as she said. She told him to petition the bishop to annul the marriage and wed a noble bride chosen by us, and in return, she would ensure that this entire ordeal was treated as if it had never happened. Alden raised his head, his eyes burning with quiet defiance. He told his mother that he could never forget Clare. Maud's voice turned venomous as she warned him that if he remained stubborn, he would be stripped of his lordship. She revealed that the High Elder was prepared to send a formal petition to the crown authorities to have him removed from his post. This was the fifth and most devastating strike. To lose his title meant losing the very last foundation he had to stand upon. Without his position as lord of the manor, his power to protect Clare, and the children from the wrath of his family would be severely diminished. Alden stood frozen in place, closing his eyes against the weight of the threat. Maud delivered her final ultimatum, granting him exactly 3 days to make his choice. She told him that by the end of the 3rd day, she expected his final answer. Alden left the main estate, his footsteps feeling heavier than lead. It felt as though he were walking on air, unmoored and adrift. As he wandered through the quiet, cobblestone alleys of the village, he tried desperately to organize his tangled thoughts. But his mind only grew more chaotic. The witnesses were silenced. The noble elders had sided entirely with his mother, and his very lordship hung in the balance. The only weapon he possessed was a single copied piece of parchment. Just then, a voice called out to him from the edge of the alleyway, addressing him as the lord of the manor. Alden turned to see Silas. The wise parish scholar explained that he had traveled to the castle town on matters of the church. Alden felt a sudden rush of gladness, yet he was also deeply ashamed. He did not want the venerable old man to see him in such a wretched, defeated state. But Silas's sharp eyes had already read the deep sorrow etched into Alden's face. The wise old man spoke slowly, noting that the young lord seemed to be carrying a heavy burden. Alden nodded in defeat, confessing to Silas that he simply did not know what to do anymore. Silas paused, looking up at a clear moon hanging over the medieval rooftops. He asked Alden if he remembered the words he had shared with him not long ago. Alden looked up. Silas repeated the proverb, reminding him that true affection is built long before the bonds of blood. As Alden heard those words again, he felt something stir deep within his chest, though he could not yet fully grasp its meaning. Silas offered one last piece of wisdom, stating that the answer a man seeks is almost always found in the exact place where his journey first began. With that, the wise parish scholar leaned on his wooden walking stick and disappeared into the shadows of the alley. Alden stood alone, staring at the empty path. The phrase echoed in his mind, the place where it first began. It was the very next morning, just as dawn broke over the horizon, that Alden rode out to the humble timber cottage where Clare was staying. When he entered, he found Clare sitting quietly beside their sleeping children. A small oil lamp flickered on the table as she carefully stitched a torn piece of woolen clothing. She was mending the ragged garments her children wore. As Alden stepped inside, Clare looked up, surprised to see him at such an early hour. Alden sat down across from her, his eyes tracing the tired lines on her face. He wondered just how many exhausting, sorrowful days she had endured, raising 2 children alone in the unforgiving cold. Alden spoke with gentle honesty, telling her that the situation they faced was incredibly difficult. Clare lowered her needle and thread, asking quietly if his mother and the noble elders were standing against them. Alden confirmed her fears, adding that even his title and position as lord were now in jeopardy. Clare's eyes trembled with worry. She looked over at the sleeping twins, then turned back to Alden, telling him that she was fine. She said that she had survived this long and could continue to survive. Her greatest fear, she confessed, was that he would lose too much of his own life because of her. Alden reached across the table and took Clare's rough, weathered hands in his own. He told her that when he lost her, he had already lost everything that mattered in this world. He said that a title, a manor, and a noble name were things that could be lost and found again. But for 3 agonizing years, he had believed that she was gone forever. Tears welled up in Clare's eyes as Alden's voice grew firm with unwavering resolve. He told her that he had nothing left to fear, no matter what the world tried to take from him. Clare bowed her head, and a single tear slipped down to land upon the back of her hand. Alden squeezed her hands tighter, letting the warmth of her skin anchor him to the present. Just then, young Finn stirred from his sleep. The little boy opened his eyes, saw Alden sitting there, and sleepily reached his small arms out toward him. Alden gently lifted his son into his arms. Finn rested his head against Alden's chest and peacefully drifted back to sleep. Feeling the fragile, trusting warmth of his child against his heart, Alden closed his eyes. For the sake of these children, and for the woman who had protected them, he knew he could never surrender. He still had time before the 3 days were up. The following day, Alden rode into the bustling castle town to seek out the healer who had treated Clare 3 years ago. After asking around the market square, he located Gareth, a local monk healer who operated a small apothecary near the old monastery. When Alden entered and explained his desperate situation, Gareth hesitated for a long time. Finally, the healer went into the back room and returned with an old, leather-bound ledger. It was a record book filled with Gareth's own handwritten notes. There, clearly written in ink, was the date, Clare's name, and the undeniable diagnosis that she was carrying twins. Alden asked the monk if he would be willing to bring this ledger before the noble elders and testify to its truth. Gareth slowly nodded his head. He told Alden that he had seen with his own eyes just how frail and terrified the young mistress had been that day. He stated that as a man of faith and healing, he could not turn a blind eye to such cruelty. Alden grasped the healer's hands in profound gratitude. He now had 3 weapons in his arsenal: the forged death parchment, the healer's medical ledger, and a man willing to speak the truth. This was enough to stand before the elders. That very evening,
An unexpected visitor arrived at Alden's quarters. It was Will, the trusted manor steward. This was the same man who had previously bowed to Maud's threats and refused to speak. Now Will stood before Alden, his face pale and tight with anxiety. He quietly asked for permission to speak. Alden offered the old servant a seat and urged him to unburden his mind. Will's hands shook as he began his confession. He admitted that he had been paralyzed by his fear of the mistress of the house. But after seeing Alden desperately searching for the young lady, he had been entirely unable to sleep. Will looked Alden in the eye and confessed that he had seen it all. He had watched as the pregnant young lady was mercilessly dragged out of the manor gates into the freezing winter night, weeping and pleading as she beat her fists against the heavy wooden doors. Alden asked him slowly, his voice thick with emotion, if he would be brave enough to repeat those exact words in front of the house elders. Will squeezed his eyes shut, plunging into a long, heavy silence. Finally, he opened his eyes and gave a firm nod. He declared that he would do it, for he could not bear to carry such a dark sin in his heart for the rest of his days. Alden closed his eyes and let out a long breath. A path forward was finally beginning to reveal itself. 2 documents and 1 eyewitness. It might not be enough to break the iron will of a noble house, but it was all he had, and it was the truth. The next day would be the 3rd and final day. That night, Alden sat entirely alone in his study. The flame of the oil lamp flickered in the drafty room. Tomorrow, he had to give his mother his final answer. He had to choose whether to surrender and live a hollow life or to wage an open war against his entire noble lineage. Alden closed his eyes, his mind drifting back to that freezing night 3 years ago. He imagined Clare, heavily pregnant, weeping outside the towering iron gates of the estate. Where could she have possibly gone? How freezing must the wind have been? How terrified must she have felt? Alden gritted his teeth in quiet fury. His thoughts then shifted to the faces of his 2 beautiful children. He remembered Finn reaching out to him, and Faye resting her head against his shoulder. He remembered the small, fragile warmth of their bodies. And then the words of Silas the parish scholar echoed in the quiet room once more. Affection is built before blood. Alden slowly opened his eyes. He finally understood exactly what the wise old man had meant. The profound bond of love and survival that Clare had built with her children over 3 years of starvation and exile was infinitely stronger than the cold. Arrogant bloodlines of his noble house and the enduring love that Alden shared with Clare was just as unbreakable. No one could ever sever those ties, not the grand legacy of his family, and certainly not the cruel threats of his mother. Alden rose from his heavy oak chair. His decision was made. The answer he would give his mother tomorrow was simple. He would never give up. He would face their wrath head on. There was only one way to do this. He would gather every elder of the house, present the hidden documents, bring forth his witness, and drag every dark secret into the light of day. Whether it led to his ruin or his salvation, he would no longer hide in the shadows.
From the thatched roof outside his window, the low, mournful cry of a night bird echoed through the dark estate. Alden listened to the sound, his eyes closed in silent prayer. Tomorrow was coming. When the morning of the third day arrived, Alden walked into the grand hall of the main estate. The High Elder was already there, seated directly beside Maud. Both of their faces were set in expressions of cold, unyielding stone. Alden walked to the center of the hall and stood proudly before them. He addressed his mother and the High Elder, declaring that he had come to deliver his final answer. Before Alden could say another word, the High Elder raised a hand to stop him. He commanded Alden to listen closely. Before speaking, the elder revealed that late last night, a formal petition had already been dispatched to the Crown authorities, officially accusing Alden of abandoning his duties as Lord and Magistrate. During his recent travels, Alden's eyes wavered slightly. He asked if the petition had truly been sent. The High Elder confirmed it, adding with a cruel smirk that depending on the answer Alden gave today, that petition could easily be intercepted and withdrawn. Alden clenched his jaw. They had already struck the final blow. They had moved against him before he even had the chance to speak his piece. Yet Alden stood tall, his voice ringing clear and steady through the vast, echoing hall. He looked the High Elder in the eye and stated that his will remained entirely unchanged. He declared with absolute certainty that he would be bringing his wife Clare and his children back to their rightful place in this house. The High Elder's face contorted in sudden, furious shock. Then consider your position gone. Maud stood up from her heavy wooden chair. The High Elder asked his final question, demanding to know if Alden was truly abandoning his noble house. Alden looked directly at his mother. He stated clearly that he was not abandoning his lineage, but rather protecting his true family. Maud's eyes wavered in the candlelight, but her expression quickly hardened into cold stone. She told him to do as he pleased, but warned him never to cross the threshold of the manor hall again. That was her final word. Alden bowed his head in silence and walked out of the echoing great hall. Upon returning to the sheriff's court, a message from his superior, the royal governor, was waiting for him. He was summoned immediately. Alden stood before the governor, whose face was grim. The governor explained that the High Elder of Alden's house had sent a formal writ questioning Alden's whereabouts during the recent king's errand. The governor asked if Alden could defend himself. Alden spoke plainly, explaining that he had been delayed while tending to the sick and starving commoners he encountered on the road. The governor sighed heavily, stating that Alden knew full well the immense power and wealth of his noble family. Even if the governor wished to shield him, he could not withstand their influence. Alden slowly nodded. Understanding the reality of the court, he accepted his fate. The governor told him a final ruling would come in a few days and advised him to prepare his heart. Alden left the governor's chamber. As he walked down the cold stone corridor, his legs felt heavy. He was going to lose his royal commission, the seat he had faithfully held for 3 long years. Yet Alden did not stop walking. There was no reason to halt his steps. That evening, Will, the trusted manor steward, sought out Alden. The old servant's face was shadowed with deep sorrow. Will announced that he had grave news. Maud had banished Robin from the estate that very day.
Alden's eyes wavered with shock. Will explained that someone had whispered to Maud,
revealing that Robin intended to aid Alden in uncovering the truth.
In her fury, Maud ordered Robin to pack his meager belongings and leave the manor immediately.
Alden closed his eyes. His witness was gone. Robin had been cast out of the only home he had ever known, all because he had chosen to stand by Alden.
Alden clenched his fists. He asked Will where Robin was.
Will replied that the poor man had nowhere to go and was sitting in the mud. Outside the main castle gates, Alden rose at once and hurried toward the manor estate. There, by the heavy iron gates, he found Robin clutching a small wool bundle,
slumped on the wet ground. When Robin saw Alden, tears welled in his eyes.
He apologized profusely, weeping that he had been too careless. Alden sank to his knees in the mud before his servant. Robin was horrified and begged his lord to stand, but Alden refused. He told Robin that he was the one who was sorry for bringing such ruin upon him. Wiping away his tears, Robin shook his head. He confessed that he should have
stepped forward long ago. For 3 years, the memory of watching Clare being
dragged out into the winter famine while he stood by and did nothing had weighed heavily on his soul. Alden stood up and asked if Robin had any place to seek shelter. Robin shook his head. Alden told him to follow, leading him to the thatched cottage where Clare was staying. When they arrived, Clare saw Robin and immediately took his rough hands in hers. The two wept together. They shared a long history, and the unspoken memories of their time living within the cold walls of the manor hall flowed between them. 2 days later, the royal decree of dismissal arrived. The High Elder's petition had been accepted by the Crown authority. Alden received the notice in absolute silence. He surrendered his manorial charter to the governor. As he walked out of the sheriff's court for the last time, the bailiffs and clerks stood at a distance, watching him with pity in their eyes. Yet none dared to speak. Alden gave them a slight bow and stepped out into the muddy market square. A heavy spring rain began to pour from the gray heavens. Strangely, his heart did not feel heavy. Instead, he felt as though a massive stone he had carried for years had finally been lifted from his shoulders. He was stripped of his title and estranged from his wealthy lineage. All he possessed in the world was the forged parchment of the death right and Gareth's medical ledger. But as his boots stepped through the rain, his path led straight to Clare. That alone was enough. Night fell over the village. Outside the thatched cottage, Alden sat alone on a wooden bench in the yard. The moon shone brightly through the clearing clouds. From inside the timber walls, he could hear the gentle sound of Clare singing a low, sweet hymn to Finn and Fay as they drifted to sleep. Listening to her voice, Alden gazed up at the stars. He had lost his magistrate seat. He had turned his back on his powerful family. Robin, his loyal witness, was banished, and the lords of his house remained untouchable in their wealth. He held nothing but 2 pieces of parchment. What could he possibly achieve with them? Could he ever force the prominent dukes to listen? Could he secure a rightful, honorable place for Clare and the children? Alden closed his eyes as a wave of bitter guilt washed over him. He should have fought back harder from the very beginning. When Clare was suffering under Maud's cruel rule, he should have been a stronger shield. Before he rode off on the king's errand, he should have stayed to hear the words Clare had swallowed back. He knew now that she had been trying to tell him about the child growing in her womb. If he had only listened then, would everything be different? Yes, it would have been. At the very least, Clare would not have had to endure the freezing winter famine alone. The singing stopped. The twins had fallen asleep. The heavy wooden door creaked open, and Clare stepped out quietly into the night. She sat down on the bench beside Alden. For a long time, they simply watched the silver moon in silence. Clare was the first to speak. She asked softly if he had truly lost his royal commission. Alden nodded, confirming it was true. Clare looked down at her hands, resting in her lap, and whispered that it was all because of her. Alden firmly denied it, stating that it was entirely his own choice. Clare reached into the folds of her linen gown and pulled something out. It was a small, frayed scrap of dark wool. Alden looked at it closely, recognizing the faded fabric. Clare spoke in a hushed voice, explaining that it was torn from the heavy cloak he wore on the morning he departed for the royal assize, on the day she was violently dragged out of the manor gates. This tiny scrap of cloth was the only thing she managed to hide. Against her chest, she told him that she had clung to this piece of wool for 3 long years, surviving the harsh winters, hoping that one day he would return so she could show it to him. Alden closed his eyes, his throat tightening with unbearable sorrow. He imagined Clare holding that torn piece of cloth in the freezing cold, drawing warmth from a mere memory. He thought of her giving birth to Finn and Faye in the dirt, collapsing under the weight of firewood, all while he was utterly blind to her suffering. He whispered heavily that he was too late. Clare shook her head gently. She told him he was not late, because he was here, with her now. Alden reached out and held Clare's hand. The pale moonlight rested softly upon their intertwined fingers. A long time passed. Clare eventually went back inside to rest, leaving Alden alone with his thoughts. In the corner of the yard, a white falcon had landed silently. Alden noticed the noble bird watching him. In the moonlight, he could faintly see an old scar beneath its left wing. Alden spoke to the creature, realizing it was the same wounded bird Clare had saved from the forest beast. The falcon tilted its head. Alden murmured that they were very much alike. He, too, had lived like a dead man for 3 years, only to be brought back to life by Clare's grace. The falcon fluttered its wings quietly, but did not fly away. It remained steadfast in the yard. Alden closed his eyes again, and the voice of Silas, the wise parish scholar, echoed in his mind. The old man had told him that the bond of the heart is forged long before the bond of blood, and that the answer always lies in the place where it first began.
The place where it first began. Alden slowly chewed on those words. Where was that beginning? Was it the muddy market square where he first saw her? Selling bread? Was it the cold stone church where they spoke their vows? No, it was something far deeper. The true beginning was the moment their souls connected. Free of noble titles, manor wealth, and societal decrees. It was the moment they looked at each other simply as a man and a woman. All he had to do was return to that purest foundation. They could start over from there. It did not matter if they possessed nothing in this world. Alden opened his eyes. At that moment, the white falcon spread its wings wide and soared upward into the night sky. Alden watched the pale shape disappear into the moonlight for a long time. His mind was finally clear. He knew exactly what he had to do and how he was going to do it. Dawn broke, casting a golden light over the village. Alden gathered Clare, Robin, and Will together in the small room. They sat in a tight circle near the hearth fire, keeping their voices low so as not to wake Finn and Fay, who were sleeping soundly on their straw pallets. Alden spoke with quiet authority, asking them to listen to his plan. He explained that trying to reason with the prominent dukes within the walls of their estate was a lost cause. However, there was one path left. Robin asked what that path could be. Alden stated that while Maud and the High Elder controlled the manor, they could not control the king's law. He intended to take the matter to the king's chancellor at the High Shire Court. Banishing a pregnant wife and forging a false death to deceive a lord was not a private family dispute. It was a severe crime under crown authority. A heavy silence fell over the room. Will spoke up hesitantly, warning that the High Elder's influence surely reached the king's chancellor as well. Alden agreed, but pointed out that they had undeniable proof. They held the forged parchment of the death rite, Gareth's medical ledger with its conflicting dates, and Robin, who could swear an oath before God on what he had witnessed. If the evidence was presented formally, not even the highest court could simply bury it. Clare looked at Alden with deep concern. She warned that if this escalated to the Shire Court, Maud would face terrible ruin and shame. Alden met her gaze steadily, acknowledging that he knew this. Clare asked if he was truly willing to go through with it. Alden closed his eyes for a brief moment, then opened them with unwavering resolve. He told Clare that considering the 3 years of agony she had endured, this consequence was a small price. He clarified that his goal was not to seek vengeance against his mother, but to bring the absolute truth to light. He wanted to secure a legitimate, honorable place in the world for Clare, Finn, and Fay. Hearing his devotion, Clare slowly nodded. Tears pooled in her eyes, but she did not let them fall. She whispered that she understood and would follow his will. With the plan set, Alden rode to the old monastery to seek out Gareth. The local monk healer was sitting in his usual spot, his leather-bound ledger resting on the wooden table. Alden explained the situation and asked if Gareth would be willing to testify before the king's chancellor. Gareth fell into deep thought, noting that Alden's noble house was incredibly powerful, and questioning if the words of an old monk would be enough to sway the court. Alden assured him
that he would not stand alone. Alden and Robin would testify alongside him. Gareth looked deeply into Alden's determined eyes. Slowly, the old healer nodded. He confessed that he had seen Clare's frail condition firsthand on that fateful day. He had always been troubled by how withered she looked during her pregnancy, and now he finally understood the dark reason behind it. Alden bowed deeply, expressing his profound gratitude. Gareth waved his hand humbly, stating that a man of God merely does what is righteous. Alden left the monastery. The sky above was a brilliant, clear blue. All the pieces were finally in place. He had the 2 pieces of parchment, Gareth, Robin, and his own unwavering truth. Tomorrow, they would march to the Shire Court. The very next morning, Alden arrived at the grand stone steps of the High Shire Court. He carried a formal petition he had penned himself, detailing the cruel banishment of his pregnant wife and the wicked forgery used to deceive him. Attached to his petition were the false death writ and Gareth's authentic medical ledger. Alden handed the sealed documents to the court bailiff on duty. The court magistrate checked the dates. He looked back and forth between the 2 pieces of sealed parchment. His heavy brow rose. There is a great gap between these dates, he noted. More than a fortnight lies between the day the pregnancy was recorded and the day the death writ was signed. That is the truth of it, Alden replied. She was cast out into the bitter cold while carrying my children. And only a fortnight later did they forge the writ of her death. The magistrate set the parchment down upon his heavy oak desk and looked at Alden. Does this concern the noble house of the old lord? It does, Alden answered. The magistrate's face grew troubled. The weight of that powerful family name was a heavy burden in the Shire Court. Alden spoke with a steady voice. I am Alden, former lord of the manor. I am the one directly wronged in this matter. And I am the one bringing this petition before the Crown's court. The magistrate hesitated for a long moment, then slowly nodded his head. I will accept the petition. Word that a formal petition had been filed at the High Shire Court spread through the cobblestone streets like wildfire. Before the sun had set, the news reached the ears of the old High Lord of the estate. He immediately summoned Alden to his grand hall. Alden stood tall before the old nobleman. Is it true that you have brought a petition to the High Court? The High Lord demanded. It is true, my lord, Alden replied. The old man's face grew red with fury. You foolish man! Is it not enough to drag your own family name through the mud? Must you drag the affairs of the nobility into the public square? Withdraw it at once! Alden shook his head. I cannot withdraw it. If you do not withdraw this petition, you are finished, the High Lord bellowed. A man stripped of his title, banished from his noble house. How do you expect to survive in this world? Alden looked the old lord in the eye. My wife, Clare, survived for 3 long years with nothing but the clothes on her back. I can do the same. The High Lord snapped his mouth shut. He stared at Alden for a long, tense moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was a low, dangerous whisper. We shall see about that. A few days passed.
A royal writ arrived from the Shire Court, declaring that all involved parties were to be summoned to verify the truth of the matter.
Maud received the royal summons as well. The proud,
Untouchable mistress of the house was being dragged before the magistrate. Maud sent for Alden. When he stepped into the grand manor hall, he saw that his mother's face was deathly pale. It was an expression he had never seen on her before. The cold, impenetrable mask of the stern mistress was cracking, splintering right before his eyes. "Would you truly go this far to ruin me?" she asked, her voice trembling. Alden spoke slowly, his voice calm but resolute.
"Mother, I am not doing this to punish you."
Then why do this at all?
she cried. "Because of the 3 years of suffering my wife, Clare."
"Endured in the mud and the snow," Alden said. "Those 3 years must be brought into the light. The truth must be known, so that my wife and my children can walk under the sun,
without shame, rightfully belonging to this world."
Maud closed her eyes. She sat there in the heavy oak chair for a long time. Alden waited. The only sound was the wind howling against the stone walls of the manor. When Maud finally opened her eyes, tears were pooling in them. Seeing those tears made Alden's heart waver for a fleeting second. It was the very first time in his life he had ever seen his mother weep. "What must I do at the court?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Alden understood the weight of those words instantly. She was surrendering. She was willing to admit the truth. "You need only tell the magistrate exactly what happened," Alden said softly. Maud wiped her tears with the sleeve of her gown. She gave a slow, defeated nod. The day came when all the involved souls were gathered in the great stone hall of the Shire Court. Alden, Clare, Maud, the High Lord, Gareth the monk healer, and Will, the trusted manor steward, were all brought before the bench. The High Magistrate sat in the seat of judgment, his robes dark and imposing. The magistrate reviewed the documents. He looked back and forth between the forged death writ and Gareth's authentic medical ledger. Then he called Will forward. "Did you testify that you saw the events of that?" "Did you see it with your own eyes?" the magistrate asked. Will answered, his voice shaking with fear and guilt. "Yes, my lord, I saw it myself. I saw the young mistress being dragged out the manor gates while heavy with child. I saw her weeping and pounding on the heavy wooden doors." The magistrate then turned his gaze to Gareth. "Is this medical ledger written by your own hand?" "Yes, my lord," Gareth answered firmly. "I took her pulse and wrote the diagnosis myself. She was carrying twins." The magistrate checked the dates one last time. Then he turned his stern gaze upon Maud. "Mistress of the house, is it true that you cast your daughter-in-law out into the streets?" Maud closed her eyes for a brief moment. When she opened them, she slowly nodded her head. "It is true." A heavy silence fell over the stone hall. The High Lord scowled deeply, his face a mask of outrage. But Maud did not look at him. She did not look at anyone. "And is it also true that you ordered the forging of a false death writ?" The magistrate pressed. Another stretch of silence filled the room. Maud's hands trembled as they rested upon her lap.
"It is true," she whispered. The magistrate set the parchment down. He turned his eyes toward Clare. Clare stood up from her wooden bench, her head held high. The magistrate asked, "Is this woman the lawful wife of Alden?" "Yes, she is." Alden answered without hesitation. "And are those children your rightful blood?" "They are," Alden declared. "They are my children." The magistrate then looked at the High Lord. "My lord, I suggest you withdraw your opposition to this petition here and now." The High Lord's face turned to stone. But beneath the piercing gaze of the Crown's magistrate, he knew he had no power left to fight. He bowed his head stiffly. "I shall do as you say." They walked out of the Shire Court and into the cool air of the cobblestone street. Clare held the hands of the children. Finn held tight to Clare's hand, while little Faye reached out and grabbed Alden's hand. Alden squeezed Faye's tiny fingers. Her hand was so warm. Before Maud stepped into her waiting carriage, she called out, "Alden." Alden turned and looked at his mother. The look in her eyes had changed completely. The cold, the hardened glare of the noblewoman was gone, replaced by something fragile and weary. "Bring the children to me," she said softly. Alden gently led Finn and Faye over to where Maud stood. And then a wondrous thing happened. Maud lowered herself, kneeling down in the dirt before the two children. For a woman of her pride and station, it was an unimaginable act. The stern, untouchable mistress of the manor was bowing to the children she had once discarded. "Finn! Faye!" she whispered. Finn looked up at the strange old woman with wide eyes. Faye shyly hid behind Alden's leg. Maud slowly reached out her hand. Finn hesitated for a moment, then reached out and gently touched her fingertips. A single tear slipped from Maud's eye and rolled down her wrinkled cheek. Clare stood nearby, watching the scene unfold. Alden reached out and took Clare's hand. He could feel her fingers trembling slightly. Maud stood up and looked directly at Clare. For a long time, no words were spoken between them. The air was thick with the weight of the past. Finally, Maud opened her mouth and spoke in a low, trembling voice. "Forgive me." Just 2 words, but everyone standing in that muddy street could feel the immense weight of the sorrow, the regret, and the surrender carried within them. Clare bowed her head. Tears began to fall from her eyes, splashing against the cobblestones. She could not find the words to speak. Maud turned and climbed into her carriage. The wooden wheels clattered against the stones as it rolled away into the distance. Alden stood there, watching the carriage until it disappeared from sight. The long, agonizing nightmare of the past 3 years was finally coming to an end. 10 days had passed since they left the Shire Court. Alden took Clare and the children and found a small, humble home in a quiet parish on the edge of the countryside. It was no grand manor hall of stone. It was a simple timber cottage with a thatched roof. The yard was small, and there were only 2 rooms inside. But the morning sun poured through the wooden shutters, filling the space with golden light. In the corner of the yard stood a sprawling old apple tree. Spring was deepening, and fresh green buds were sprouting along its gnarled branches. While Alden carried their modest belongings inside, Finn ran circles around the grassy yard. Fay crouched beneath the old apple tree, patting the soft earth with her little hands. Inside, Clare was sweeping the hearth and arranging their few pots and wooden bowls. Alden paused at the doorway and watched them. It was such an ordinary sight, a common, everyday scene. Yet, looking at this simple life filled his heart to the very brim. Finn spotted him and ran over, his face glowing with excitement.
Father, do we live here now?
Alden smiled and lifted the boy high into the air.
We do. We will live right here. You, your sister, your mother, and me.
All of us together.
Finn burst into a fit of joyful giggles. The bright, happy sound echoed through the small yard. Hearing the noise, Clare opened the wooden door and looked outside. Her eyes met Alden's. She smiled. It was the exact same bright, beautiful smile he had fallen in love with all those years ago behind the soup stall in the muddy market square. Seeing that smile, Alden felt tears prick the corners of his eyes. He swallowed hard, holding them back. Instead, he gave her a wide, beaming smile in return. The day after they settled into their new cottage, Alden set out on the dirt road alone. He was heading to the windy hill near the old monastery, the very place he had visited every single day for 3 years. He was going to Clare's grave. He climbed the gentle slope until he saw the small mound of earth and the cold stone marker. The words carved into the stone still read that it was the resting place of his beloved wife. Alden sank to his knees in the damp grass before the headstone. He did not know how many thousands of words he had spoken to this empty patch of dirt over the years. But today was different. He took a deep breath and spoke softly. "My love, I believe I can leave this place empty now." A gentle breeze swept across the hill, rustling the tall green grass. "You are alive," he whispered to the wind. "You are at home, safe with our children. This stone marker no longer belongs here." Alden reached out and brushed his hand against the cold, rough stone. "I will have this cleared away soon." The wind blew down from the crest of the hill, sweeping over the grave where his wife did not lie. Alden closed his eyes. He thought of all the heavy, dragging footsteps that had brought him to this spot, day after day, year after year. Those steps had not been in vain, because he had never stopped loving her. Because he had never let her memory fade, he had been able to find her again. Alden slowly rose to his feet. He bowed his head deeply to the stone one last time, a final farewell to his grief. Then he turned and walked down the hill. His footsteps had never felt so light. A few afternoons later, a carriage rolled up to the wooden fence of their cottage. It was Maud. She stepped down into the dirt road, holding a large cloth bundle wrapped tightly in her arms. Alden opened the wooden gate. "Mother?" Maud looked at her son. Without a word, she stepped past him and into the yard. Finn, who had been chasing a beetle in the grass, stopped and looked up at the old woman. Fay, who was sitting beneath the apple tree, turned her head. "Finn? Fay?" Maud called out softly. Finn trotted over quickly, while Fay stood up and walked over at a slower, shyer pace. Maud knelt in the grass and untied the cloth bundle. Inside were two small sets of clothing, little woolen tunics and soft linen shifts. She had sewn them herself. The stitching was incredibly tight and careful, the work of many long, quiet hours. "Your grandmother made these for you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Finn picked up one of the tunics and held it up, inspecting it with wide, curious eyes. Fay stepped closer and gently touches Maud's fingertips. Maud looked down at the little girl. Her eyes grew red, and tears welled up on her lashes. She reached out a shaking hand and softly stroked Fay's hair. Fay did not run away. She stood perfectly still, accepting her grandmother's gentle touch. At that moment, Clare stepped out of the cottage.
Her eyes met Maud's. A long, heavy silence stretched between the two women.
It was Maud who bowed her head first. "May I come inside?" she asked humbly. Clare nodded her head. "Welcome, Mother. Please come in." The two women walked through the wooden door together. Alden stood in the yard, watching them go. The green leaves of the apple tree rustled softly in the afternoon breeze. Finn came running over to Alden, holding up his new woolen tunic. "Father, look!" Alden smiled warmly and scooped the boy up into his arms. "It is beautiful, Finn." Finn laughed again, and that sweet, the ringing sound filled the little yard with life. That evening, the whole family gathered around the wooden table for supper. Maud, Clare, Alden, Finn, and Fay. The small room was packed tightly, but it felt warm and safe. Clare had prepared the meal. It was a humble supper of hot broth and baked bread. Maud took her wooden spoon and tasted the broth. She sat in silence for a moment, letting the warmth settle in her chest. Then she spoke in a soft, quiet voice. "The broth is well seasoned." Clare bowed her head gently. "Thank you, Mother." Maud did not say anything else. Instead, she reached across the table, took a piece of warm bread, and placed it gently into Finn's wooden bowl. That simple gesture was enough. It was a movement of the hands that carried far more love, acceptance, and peace than any words ever could. Finn hummed a happy little tune as he chewed the warm bread and swallowed the rich broth. Fay ate her meal slowly, taking small, careful spoonfuls of the hot soup. Alden sat at the head of the heavy wooden table, simply watching the scene before he finally picked up his own wooden spoon. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, he could actually taste his food. It was a hearty, comforting flavor. It was the taste of life. A taste he had entirely forgotten over the past 3 years of bitter winter. The next morning, Alden rose from his bed in the early, mist-shrouded hours before dawn. His body moved on sheer instinct, driven by the heavy habit of the past 3 years. It was the exact hour he would normally walk the cold stone path to the candlelit chapel. But this morning, Alden did not walk to the chapel. Instead, he stepped out into the frost-kissed courtyard of their thatched cottage. The early morning air was biting and crisp. He stood beneath the bare branches of the old apple tree and looked up at the sky. A few pale stars still clung to the fading darkness. For 3 years, he had spent every morning kneeling before a cold stone altar, staring at the flickering candle lit for the dead, bowing his head in endless grief for his lost wife. But those days of shadows were over. From this day forward, he would not greet the morning in a silent tomb, but by the side of his living, breathing family. Alden closed his eyes, letting the profound peace of that thought wash over him. A soft noise drifted from inside the timber cottage. It was the sound of Finn tossing and turning, followed by the sudden, frightened cry of a child waking from a bad dream. Then came the gentle, soothing murmur of Clare's voice. Alden opened the heavy wooden door and stepped inside. Clare was sitting on the edge of the straw-stuffed mattress, holding Finn against her chest and patting his back with a tender rhythm. Faye was sitting up beside them, rubbing her sleepy eyes with tiny fists. Alden walked over and gently scooped Faye into his arms. "It is all right," he whispered into the quiet room. "Father is right here." Faye buried her little face into Alden's woolen tunic, and a deep, radiant warmth spread through his chest. Clare continued to soothe Finn, but she looked up and met Alden's gaze. Their eyes locked in the dim morning light. Neither of them spoke a single word. There was no need for words. This quiet, simple moment was the very scene Alden had desperately yearned for in his darkest, most agonizing dreams over the last 3 years. A few days later, a visitor arrived at the edge of the village. It was Silas, the wise parish scholar. He had traveled up the muddy castle road on an errand and mentioned that he had heard the sweeping rumors of Alden's miraculous reunion. Alden walked out to the edge of the dirt lane to greet him. Silas looked at Alden's face, his old eyes crinkling as a slow, knowing smile spread across his weathered features. "Your countenance has changed greatly, my lord," the old man noted. Alden bowed his head in deep respect. "It is all thanks to you, wise scholar." Silas chuckled softly. "What could I have possibly done? You found your own way." "You gave me the words I needed to hear," Alden said quietly. "You told me that the bonds of the heart are built long before the bonds of blood." Those words were the only lantern that lit my path through the blackest night. Silas nodded slowly, leaning his weight onto his carved wooden staff. "And do you finally understand the true meaning of those words?" Alden turned his gaze toward the courtyard of the cottage. Clare was sitting on a wooden bench in the yard with the twins. Finn was crouching in the dirt, drawing shapes with a fallen twig, while Faye clapped her hands in delight beside him. Clare looked back and forth between her two children, a bright, beautiful smile gracing her face. "I believe I do," Alden answered, his voice thick with emotion. "What Clare has built with those children over there? Past 3 years in the bitter cold and the muddy market squares, that is the true bond. Even without a noble name, even without the protection of a manor hall, the love they forged by eating, sleeping, laughing, and crying together every single day is deeper and stronger than any noble bloodline." Silas smiled warmly. "And the same is true for you, my lord." Alden looked back at the old man. the 3 years you spent kneeling in that freezing chapel every morning? Silas continued gently. That, too, was a bond of the heart. Even when you believed she was dead and
gone from this earth, the love you refused to let go of is exactly what led you back to her.
Alden stood in silence for a long time, looking back toward the yard. Clare lifted her head and caught his eye. She raised her hand and gave a small, joyful wave. Alden raised his own hand, waving back at his wife. Silas tapped his staff against the dirt and slowly turned around. My work here is done, the old scholar said. I believe this old man has said all he ever needed to say. Alden bowed deeply once more. Thank you, Silas. Thank you for everything. Silas walked away down the muddy village lane, stopping just once at the bend to look back and offer a gentle smile before disappearing behind the trees. Alden stood there, watching the road until the wise old man was completely out of sight. That evening, after the children were tucked safely into their beds, Alden and Clare sat side by side on a wooden bench in the quiet courtyard. The moon hung bright and heavy in the sky, casting a silver glow over the thatched roofs. The leaves of the old apple tree shimmered in the pale moonlight. Clare looked up at the vast expanse of the night sky, admiring the endless sea of stars. Alden reached into the leather pouch at his belt and pulled something out. It was a piece of silver, half of a beautifully crafted silver cloak pin. Clare looked at it, her eyes widening in sudden realization. She quickly reached up to the collar of her linen gown, her fingers trembling as she unfastened something she had kept hidden beneath her clothes. It was the other half of the silver pin, the very one she had kept safe since the day of their church wedding. You still have it? Clare whispered, her voice catching in her throat. Alden nodded slowly. I have not let it leave my side for 3 years. He held out his half of the silver pin. Clare brought her half forward, and gently, carefully, they pressed the 2 broken edges together. They fit perfectly. The jagged lines vanished, and the 2 broken halves became one whole, flawless piece of silver again. Clare's hands began to shake. Alden reached out and wrapped both of his warm hands around hers. Do you remember the vow I made on the steps of the church on our wedding day? He asked softly. Clare nodded, tears welling in her eyes. You swore before God that you would keep me safe and make me happy. I remember. It is a late promise, Alden whispered, his voice thick with sorrow and love. But from this moment until my dying breath, I swear I will keep it. A single tear slipped down Clare's cheek, followed by another, and soon she was weeping silently. They were not tears of sorrow or pain. They were tears of profound relief. The heavy burden of 3 years of suffering finally melting away into the crisp night air. Alden pulled Clare into a fierce, protective embrace, and she buried her face in his shoulder, holding on to him as if she would never let go. The silver moonlight blanketed them in its quiet grace. The leaves of the apple tree rustled softly in the evening breeze. Somewhere far off in the dark woods, the beautiful cry of a white falcon echoed through the night. It was a long, low sound, ringing out like the final note of a long and tragic tale. Spring deepened into a lush, vibrant summer. Alden lived a quiet life, having entirely surrendered his title as the lord of the manor. At first, the life of a commoner felt strange to his hands, but he quickly grew accustomed to the honest, simple rhythm of the days. He spent his afternoons playing in the dirt with his children,
And his mornings walking side by side with Clare to the muddy market square to
buy their daily provisions. Whenever Alden and the children passed by the specific corner of the market where he and Clare had first met, Clare would stop and gaze at the cobblestones. Alden would stop beside her, a knowing smile on his lips. "Do you remember?" he would ask. Clare would nod, a playful glint in her eyes. "This is the exact spot where I used to sell oat cakes and honey bread." "Yes," Alden laughed, "and the exact spot where I came to buy them every single day just to see you." Clare let out a bright, ringing laugh. "And you were so terribly blind, my lord, that it took you an entire month to finally speak to me." Alden threw his head back and roared with laughter. It was a loud, booming, joyous sound, a sound he had not made in years. Hearing his father's joy, Finn began to giggle loudly, and Faye quickly joined in, her sweet laughter echoing through the square. The merchants and villagers passing by turned to look at the family of four, standing in the mud, laughing together with such pure, unbridled happiness. Seeing their joy, the townspeople could not help but smile warmly as they went about their day. Autumn eventually swept across the land, turning the leaves of the apple tree a fiery red. Maud, the stern mistress of the house, began to visit the small cottage once a month. Every time she rode down from the grand estate, she brought something she had sewn or knitted with her own hands for the children. A warm woolen coif or a thick winter cloak. In the beginning, the visits were stiff and terribly awkward. Both Clare and Maud walked on eggshells, painfully cautious around one another. But as the months passed, the heavy ice between them slowly began to thaw. One brisk afternoon, Maud walked into the small, smoky kitchen and sat on a wooden stool right next to Clare. Clare was busy kneading dough to bake fresh bread by the hearth fire. Without a word, Maud reached her hands into the flour and began to help knead the heavy dough. For a long time, the two women worked side by side in complete silence. The only sound, the crackling of the fire and the rhythmic thumping of the dough against the wooden table. Finally, Maud broke the silence. "Your hands are very skilled," she said softly, her voice lacking its usual sharp edge. Clare bowed her head respectfully. "There is still much I wish to learn from you, Mother." Maud stopped kneading for a brief moment. She stared into the fire and then spoke in a low, quiet voice. "Then let us bake together from now on." It was an incredibly brief exchange, yet within those few simple words, an entire world of forgiveness, reconciliation, and a new beginning had been forged. The rich, comforting smell of baking bread drifted out of the kitchen window and into the courtyard. Outside, the joyful shouts of the twins echoed as they chased each other around the yard. Alden sat on a wooden stump near the door, listening to the sounds of his home. This was true happiness. It was not found in grand castles, in royal courts, or in chests of silver coins. It was found right here, in the smell of warm bread, the sound of his children's laughter, and the sight of his wife and his mother. Sitting side by side, it was everything he could ever want, and it was more than enough. On a crisp, late autumn evening, the entire family gathered in the courtyard. Maud had stayed for supper and sat comfortably on a wooden chair wrapped in a heavy fur cloak. Alden called the children over. "Finn, Faye, come here. I have something to show you." The twins ran over, their eyes wide with curiosity. Alden reached into his tunic and pulled out the fully restored silver cloak pin. It gleamed brilliantly in the night. "This is a token from the day your mother and I were married in the village church," Alden explained softly. "We kept it safe all these years. When you are older, this will belong to you." Finn reached out his little hands, his eyes shining. "Let me see." Alden gently placed the silver pin into Finn's palms. The young boy turned it over and over, marveling at how the moonlight danced across the polished metal. Clare watched her son with a tender smile, then reached out and quietly took Alden's hand. Alden squeezed her fingers tightly, his thumb brushing against her knuckles. Maud sat in silence, watching Finn and Faye as they huddled together over the silver pin. In the pale moonlight, she could see that the children's eyes were the exact mirror image of Alden's. The old mistress of the house watched them for a long, quiet time, and then slowly closed her eyes. The bonds of the heart are built long before the bonds of blood. Maud had learned that lesson far too late, at the cost of so much pain. But she had learned it at last. And as she listened to the breathing of her family around her, she knew it was not too late to begin again. The autumn wind rustled the branches of the apple tree, sending a single red leaf drifting down into the dirt. The sky above was a vast canvas of glittering stars. Suddenly, the haunting cry of a white falcon echoed from the distant forest. Once, and then again, Alden looked up at the sky. High above, bathed in the silver light of the moon, a pale, winged shape glided silently across the darkness. It flapped its great wings twice before vanishing into the shadows of the night, and the children pointed up at the sky, waving their little hands. "A bird! Look, a bird!" Finn shouted happily. Clare wrapped her arms around Finn's shoulders, pulling close, while Alden lifted Faye and set her gently upon his knee. The family sat together in the quiet courtyard, gazing up at the endless sea of stars where the pale bird had disappeared. Beneath that starlight, in the modest yard of a simple thatched cottage, 5 souls breathed together in perfect peace. The long, bitter winter of 3 years had finally passed. Spring had returned to their lives, and this time it was a spring that would never, ever leave. And so, dear listeners, the harsh trials of the medieval English shires finally gave way to a lasting peace for Alden and Clare. We hope this humble story from the old cobblestone roads has brought a sense of quiet warmth and enduring hope into your hearts. True love, tested by the deepest winter and the cruelest of noble courts, proved far stronger than any grand title or ancient bloodline. May their unwavering devotion remind us all that the truest wealth lies not in
sprawling estates, but in the family we cherish deeply.
as the white falcon soars ever higher over the lush, green valleys of the peaceful English countryside. We leave you with this timeless legend.
We thank you and bid you a very good night.